evening, and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott, and tonight we'll be talking about a subject that may be difficult for many people, but it's something that is in the news, and it's an important topic that people need to understand and be able to act on. We're talking tonight about the subject of preventing child abuse, and our guest tonight is Heather Randazzo from Advocate Healthcare, Coordinator of Prevention Programs. Heather, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about this very important issue.
So let's start a little bit about the program. Before we go into the who, why, what, let's just talk about the evolution. Where did this program come from? How did it get started? What does it do now?
Well, the program, the agency that I'm with is a program of Advocate Healthcare, which is the big hospital system that's local. And the program itself is called the Childhood Trauma Treatment Program. And it started in 1979 as a request from DCFS, which is our Department of
Child and Family Services, right?
Yes. And they were saying, you know, we have all of these children who have experienced child sexual abuse and they're not responding to treatment and they need help because they're so troubled. And so the Childhood Trauma Treatment Program grew as out of that request. And so we've been around now for more than 30 years providing these specialty services, counseling and psychological testing and things like that for children.
You work both with the children and with the adults who are involved in situations, or with adults who may be seeing situations and not know how to react to them. Is that correct?
Well, the counseling and psychological services are centered around the child who's experienced, child or adolescent, and we work closely with their caregivers, whether it be a guardian, a parent of like an intact family, or a foster parent. So whoever is their primary caregiver is who we work with to stabilize the child and help them to work through their trauma. And from that came the prevention initiative. So we learned about the Stewards of Children workshop, which is an evidence-based workshop. And so we were really excited to learn that, okay, there's a system in place that we can utilize to educate adults to make a difference, to reduce the amount of children that are sexually abused. And so we began to do the initiative about 4 years ago.
Now, before the show, you mentioned some really disturbing statistics about the number of children in the United States, well, maybe worldwide, but particularly here in the United States, where people may not be aware of the prevalence of this. So can you repeat the proportion of children who've been abused?
Yes, for a long time it's been 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys experience child sexual abuse
Just
before their
spectrum,
18th birthday. Right? Yep, and that's in all socioeconomic classes, all cultures, all neighborhoods. It's happening everywhere, and those are 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys.
And have we seen that trend increase, decrease over time, or is it relatively constant?
It's been pretty constant. There's been a little bit with some of the numbers of a reduction, and we're hoping that's because of the prevention work we're doing, because we're not the only ones doing it. You know, there's a lot of concerned adults out there that are getting information and making changes.
Now, it seems like this is a fairly new topic of conversation. I know when I was growing up, certainly this, I guess my parents, I think as many good parents did, would warn us about, you know, we lived in a very urban neighborhood, and warn us about, you know, gee, just don't go certain places, and if certain people say this to you, be aware of that. But there wasn't this public discussion in the news media and amongst people every day in everyday life that you hear today. So what's happening? What accounts for that kind of sea change that we're seeing? Or do you agree that there is a sea change?
I think there is, and I think that it's really beneficial, because child sexual abuse happens when people aren't talking about it, when you know, that gives them the opportunity to have access to children, because they think, well, the adults are just going to say, oh yeah, that, you know, father so-and-so or uncle so-and-so is fine, he's trusted, we don't have to worry about them. But when adults start having conversations and saying, I'm aware that this child sexual abuse stuff is happening, so I'm going to talk to my friends about it, and we're going to together have conversations and come up with strategies to reduce the chances of it happening. If a potential offender is coming into a conversation and hears that people are talking about child sexual abuse, he's going to say, I'm going to go and find somebody else that's going to be an easier target. So that's one of the 7 steps to prevention, is actually to talk about it. Talk amongst your peers as adults.
Even if you're not seeing something immediately that would present itself as a child sexual abuse problem, just talk about it generally so that people are aware. That's the advice, is make it a topic of conversation, everyday conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And talk to your children. Talk to them about what's appropriate and inappropriate. Talk to them about, the private, keeping their body private, that it is their body, and that nobody, even somebody that they trust, nobody is allowed to touch them inappropriately, or if they are made to feel uncomfortable, that they can come to you and tell you that so-and-so made me feel uncomfortable, so-and-so said this, because those are the initial stages of child sexual abuse. The grooming stages is where the offender tries to reduce their defenses and make it acceptable for them to be touched, and then touched even more sexualized as it progresses.
And now you talked before the show about the fact that the abuser is frequently someone well known already to the child, right? As you said, a priest, an uncle, a teacher.
Yeah, somebody in a position of trust.
And this is this the common, the standard method? I mean, when you talk about grooming, it's either a position of trust that already exists, or the abuser tries to establish that relationship. Is that what happens?
90% of offenders are known and trusted by the family. So this isn't stranger danger. That's not what this is. And this is far more prevalent than stranger danger incidences. So yes, and it is a process that happens.
So is it up to the children really to be educated enough to recognize these inappropriate behaviors and bring them back to the adults? Or can the adults be on their lookout for some telltale signs that they see?
Well, this program really focuses on the adult responsibility. It's the adult responsibility to have your child buckle a seatbelt, right?
Right.
And to eat good foods. It's the adult's responsibility to say, hold my hand when we cross the street. It's the same thing for this. It's the adult's responsibility to educate their child, to be available to their child, to reduce the risk of other people having access to their child. So it's the adult's responsibility to protect their children from child sexual abuse.
So what would be something that an adult would see? Let's say the child didn't say anything. What would be a telltale sign that an adult would want to look out for, to think, that might trigger their thinking that something is amiss here?
Well, oftentimes it's a change in behavior. And a change in behavior can indicate a lot of different things. But when you see a change in a child's behavior, that's your indication to have a conversation, right? So if a child is going on with their life and they have a great group of friends, and now all of a sudden they don't want to be with that group of friends anymore, that's a change in behavior. If a child was very outgoing and then now doesn't want to participate in sports or in their activities that they would normally enjoy, that's a change in behavior that you want to pay attention to. If a child was kind of medium on their grades and not really doing very well, and then all of a sudden now they're a perfect student and doing everything right, that's a change in behavior you want to pay attention to.
Really?
As well.
Now that would be, you'd think that would be something that every parent would be thrilled with.
Absolutely. But it can be a sign that something's wrong, because children have different responses to what's happening, and sometimes children act in a perfect way in order to try and stop the abuse.
Interesting. So I can envision a parent looking at it and saying, well, this is great. Why would I want to mess with this? My child's getting straight A's. This is nothing but goodness.
Right.
But in fact, it may be a signal that something else is wrong.
Right.
Now, I know this should be a very tough question, but should the abuse be discovered and stopped, what would the parents say to the child later about, you have the ability to get straight A's, you proved that, how come we're getting B's and C's now again? I mean, it seems like an odd question, but you know, as a parent, you would think, well, I hate to see a silver cloud or a silver lining in a cloud like that, but I've seen the demonstration that my child is capable of something I didn't realize before.
Sure.
So, I mean, how would that situation play out? And it seems like you don't want to discourage the excellent behavior on the grades, but
well, It's often, when you have something like that happen, it's what really needs to occur is the child to be in an environment where they can excel appropriately. So often what is happening is, the child who's getting maybe C's, D's, or F's that suddenly gets better and is achieving more, is that they weren't getting the attention at home or in their school life or having that social emotional support.
Mm-hmm.
And now suddenly as somebody is treating them with and giving them attention, and it's inappropriate sexual attention, but there's some of that other attention. So any attention is good, to a
From that
child
perspective, right.
that isn't getting any attention. So once it's discovered that this is an inappropriate relationship and they're trying to manage it by being perfect, you go through the process of saying, okay, let's keep you safe, let's, provide you with proper social emotional attention and support so that you can excel in your academics in an appropriate way.
So in remedying a situation like this, particularly this hypothetical example we've just been discussing, it seems to me that the therapy would be for the entire family, not just the student or the child, right? That the entire family has to recognize, particularly in this kind of case, there is this lack of attention. There's something wrong in the environment that made this child more vulnerable to this kind of approach or this kind of advance from the abuser. So that is is that how the advocate health looks at it, as a family problem, not just an individual issue to be solved?
Well, this affects the whole family. It has a tremendous impact on the family system. The family system was existing in a way that this occurred. So absolutely. And the child needs their family system, and the family system needs support in dealing with this, because a parent who was the abuser needs the help. The parent who was the non-offending, caregiver needs support in trying to wrap their head around this and to figure out, how do I better care for my children and protect them, and what do I do now? And they have all sorts of feelings of guilt and shame and disgust and fear and maybe disbelief. You go through the signs of grief, you go through signs of denial,
right.
Anger, frustration, all of that. So yes, we believe in treating the family system and supporting the family system. That's what helps support that child and their healing.
Now, talk a little bit about how an episode like this in a child's life can manifest itself later in life, and what kind of long-term consequences can result from this. Because I think a lot of people just may not think about it enough to think, well, so especially in the case of teenage boys, well, so hey, the 16-year-old boy had an affair with his 30-year-old teacher. I bet he thought that was pretty cool. Maybe his friends thought that was pretty cool. But what really happens there in that case?
Well, there's significant issues in adulthood that stem from child sexual abuse, and they affect all of us in society. If you think about substance abuse and criminal activity that's surrounding substance abuse, you think about domestic violence, eating disorders, depression and suicide. All of those things have a societal impact on each one of us and on our tax dollars and everything else, right? But also, if you think about, you're talking about the male, female, and, how men seem like macho or more virile if they catch a woman or have, sexual attraction and reciprocated from a woman who's maybe older or attractive or whatnot. So that's one of the sort of gender issues that happen and that complicate those relationships. But what's the aspect of it that is very similar and that is, mirrored in child sexual abuse, and is a part of it, is that guilt and shame and confusion, and that a 16-year-old, 14-year-old male with a, maybe a 22-year-old female teacher or 30-year-old or whatnot, is that that person is an adult in a position of trust. So it's their role in that child's life, that 16, 17, 14-year-old boy's life, they're still in that role. And so they know that somebody in that role, in that position, should not be treating them this way. Even though it's so exciting that they're getting the attention, again, it comes back to that you know, that attention piece and that feeling of being wanted or, you know, loved.
Being special.
Being special, absolutely. And so it's really, I think the lesson is really for us to know we need to be there for our children and let them know that they're loved and they're special in our eyes in a healthy, social, emotional way, you know.
So coming back to the program, though, the stewardship program.
Stewards of Children.
Stewards of Children. So in the case of a child, and let's stay with this example. Say it's a 17-year-old senior who's you know, macho football player guy, and he's and the teacher is 23, 24, 25, and the football player thinks it's pretty cool that, hey, you know, teacher, look what I did, and maybe bragging to his friends. How would the program approach that? Where would you start with something like that?
Well, our program, the Stewards of Children program, is a prevention initiative. So it's before that happens, right? So this is a really good thing to do to provide for educators, for teachers, especially young teachers. You know, this is not something that is explicitly provided in the education process for somebody who's becoming a teacher. So it needs to be. Right? So they need to know about mandated reporting. They need to know that there's going to be, you know, younger males that are going to be interested in them in a sexual way, and how do you manage that? You know, what's the appropriate way of doing that? And we were really pleased. The Golden Apple Foundation is a teachers organization.
Awards the Golden Apple to the Teacher of the Year, the National Teacher of the Year. One of my former high school teachers won that award.
Really?
But go on.
Wow, that's good. But they also have a program where they're bringing the up-and-coming teachers, and they're, you know, supporting them. And so we were really fortunate to have the opportunity to provide the Stewards of Children workshop for some of the Golden Apple scholars. And they were very grateful. They were like, this was not provided. No system was put in place, that we didn't get education around child sexual abuse and what should we do and what, you know, what does it look like and how does it impact children. So it's a deficit in our training our teachers.
Is that changing, though? Are these programs being developed where the teachers are being educated?
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, we are more than happy to come out to the schools and provide this workshop to them. I know that there are some training programs and policies and procedures that are being put in place and being implemented and are more accessible today than they maybe have been 5 or 10 or 15 years ago, you know. So there's definitely been progress made, and we are in a time of progress where systems are finally, you know, looking at this under new light and saying we can do something about it. Oftentimes people feel very immobilized when they hear child sexual abuse. Oh my gosh, it's terrible. There's nothing we can do about it. It's bad, you know, and let's just push it out of the way and move on. And that's one of the things that we really appreciate with the Stewards of Children workshop is it empowers adults. It gives them knowledge and skills to address the issue and to do it responsibly.
So this may be outside of the purview of the programs you're involved with, but the offenders themselves, if we look at the statistics of 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 4 boys, that means there's an awful lot of adults who are doing this. Right? This is not just, you know, casual 1 in a million, 1 in 100,000.
No.
There's a lot.
There is a lot.
Right? Many of whom probably are undiagnosed or are still out there. So does this program approach that issue? I mean, how can you identify what causes this to happen? I mean, why do, and I would guess that it's predominantly men, but I'm sure there are women. We read about it.
There are certainly women, yes.
How do you identify this proclivity, and is there some way to reach out to those people ahead of time so that they don't commit the act in the first place?
Well, I mean, you have different dynamics with offenders. Oftentimes they are people who have experienced child abuse themselves, been sexually abused themselves, and so they're repeating this behavior because, again, it's intertwined and it's confusing because it's attached to this, you know, confusing way of loving and attaching to other people and having relationships with one another. So that's very important to have treatment. If somebody has been sexually abused, they need treatment to understand appropriate ways to have a relationship with another person. The other part of it too is that oftentimes it's older children abusing on younger children. So you might have somebody who's 14 and who's powerful, physically, or has a position of authority over a younger child that's sexually abusing. The other component to this is that offenders have between 1 and 9 victims on average, but may have up to 300 or 400 victims over the span of a lifetime. So not only do you have a lot of people abusing, but you have people abusing a lot of people.
And
that makes sense?
If we make the connection between people who are abused as children becoming abusers themselves, and how strong is that correlation? I mean, has that been measured? Is there some percentage that's known, or has that really been looked at?
It has been looked at from different directions, and I think what we want to really understand is that people who offend often were offended by, had experienced
were abused themselves, right?
Were abused themselves. There isn't a, statistics saying that if you are abused as a child, you're going to abuse it as an adult. Right. There isn't that specific correlation. But when we look at people who have been, convicted, who are known offenders, we interview them and we look at the different things that are going on.
And do we see that
in research,
a quarter of them, or 50% of them, or do we have any kind of concept of that?
It's pretty high. I think it's I think it's between 60 and 80% of people who are offenders were abused as children. Yeah. So it's pretty high.
This is a leap of logic, but theoretically, if you could catch all of those, let's say it's 80%, if you could catch that 80% while they were children, either, well, hopefully before the abuse happens, or even just after it, to actually counsel them through it, that theoretically we could reduce the incidence by 80%, right?
Because, absolutely. Significantly reduce it, yes.
So there is a sense that there really is this causation. It's not just a correlation. If you are abused as a child, does it seem that it really is, you're much more likely to become an abuser yourself?
I would caution away from making that connection because it isn't substantiated in any type of research. I think what we want to do is acknowledge that those who go on to abuse have most likely been abused as a child. And that's not always the case either. But one of the other things too is in the beginning of the Stewards of Children workshop, it speaks directly to people in the room that might be abusing children right now or thinking about abusing children. And it talks about this will let you know the devastation that you're causing by doing what you're doing. Because what we want to do is we want to get this program into places that cater to children, youth-serving organizations, churches, schools like we talked about, because that's where they go to get access to children. So part of it is having that understanding.
Sure. If you want to make a horrible analogy, Willie Sutton, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is.
Exactly.
But yes, why do you go to the churches and to the schools? Because that's where literally the target population is.
Right.
So if we come back to the individual themselves, just sort of looking at it from the outside, you think, well, if you were abused as a child and you understand firsthand what that devastation or what that did to you, why would you visit that on someone else? And how do you, I mean, how is that explained? I mean, how does that happen? How do the people who are abusers, who were abused, how do they reconcile that to themselves?
Well, we work with children and teenagers that have been abused and abused sexually, and part of it is an education process, and it's talking about what is appropriate ways to show affection. What does it mean to be loved by somebody or to give love?
Well, because you could get the wrong signals. Right?
Yes, because it's been connected inappropriately to sexualized activity. So we want to separate out what sexualized activity is and when is that appropriate and where and how and all of that versus other appropriate activities and how do you relate to somebody without the sexual piece being part of it. I mean, you're talking about a 7-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, who have learned and been raised with the understanding that love and attention is connected with sexual activity. So you need to separate that out and have them
understand that even though their experience may have taught them that at an early age,
right.
that that's not necessarily correct, and there are other ways to
right.
think about this and experience it.
Right.
So you talked earlier about the 7 warning signs to be aware of. I think we
7
got through 1 or 2
steps,
of them. So yeah.
Yes, we did. The 7 steps to protection, and I have a little thing, but it's about learning the facts. So understanding that oftentimes, an offender. So if you're being abused, you're most likely not the only one being abused. So that's initiative to speak up and to tell somebody that this is happening. So minimizing opportunity, adults, they offend when it's 1 adult, 1 child. So have 1 adult, 1 child opportunities that can be interrupted or observed by others. So if you want to have a conversation with a child, do it in a public place. If you're leaving your child in the care of somebody else, make sure that it's in a public place or that you interrupt it unexpectedly and you talk to your children. That's another step. Talk to them. Let them know it's okay to say no if somebody's trying to do something that you're uncomfortable with, because often it's, well, I have to obey Uncle so-and-so.
Someone in a position of power, right, and authority.
Exactly. So you, as their parent, saying it's okay to say no to this adult who's making you feel uncomfortable or asking you to do things that are inappropriate, say no.
Even if it's a priest.
Even if it's a priest, right. The priest, the teacher, whoever you're supposed to obey and follow directions from. Make a plan. As adults, we need to believe that the child is telling us the truth, and we need to know that we are there to protect the child. And so the child needs to have somebody that they can count on. So if a child is going to come to you and say this is happening, we need to be able to respond to that in a way that's going to be helpful to the child.
And I think that's, even though we're almost out of time, I think that's really important, that you have to believe the children. And I know in cases I've read about or cases I've personally come in contact with where the parents will frequently discount it.
Right.
Oh, Uncle so-and-so wouldn't do that. Oh,
exactly.
Stop that. You need to just ignore that.
You're making it up.
You're making it up. Right. So we have to acknowledge that the children are telling the truth.
Right. Right.
Especially the youngest children, who would not necessarily have any reason to make something like that up, right?
Right. Right. And it's difficult to hear that, and so it's difficult to believe. But we do need to make a plan. With anything, it's helpful to have a plan, and so that's one of the things that we cover in our workshop.
Well, believe it or not,
I can't believe we're
yes,
out of time.
we're already out of time. So we'll just have to do this again, and I hope you'll have stories to tell me of redemption and how the program has prevented certain things from happening.
Well, we have reached 1,000 adults, which means 10,000 children are better protected, and we need more people to help participate and make it safer for children.
Well, thank you, Heather. I appreciate your being here.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us once again for Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. You can find us every Saturday night at 8 on Comcast Channel 19, and you can see us on the web at publicperspective.tv. So until next time, thank you and good night.